The night the sky split open with rain, I never thought the sound of thunder could compete with the sound of my daughter crying. But that night it did. It swallowed her voice, her sobs, her small hands pounding against the locked door of the house that was supposed to be her home. The one her grandmother had just told her she no longer belonged to. "We've decided this isn't your home," Mom said, her words slicing through the air like lightning, and then she closed the door. Just like that, no explanation, no heart left to reason, no trace of the woman who once kissed my scraped knees when I was her daughter's age. Just a stranger holding authority over love. I remember standing in the driveway, soaked, holding my phone so tight it might have cracked, trying to process the message my daughter had sent minutes earlier. "Mom, Grandma told me to leave. She said this isn't my home anymore." I thought it had to be a misunderstanding, something said in anger, or a bad joke, because no mother, no grandmother, would leave a 12-year-old out in the rain. But I was wrong. When I pulled up, headlights cutting through the storm, I saw her, my baby, sitting on the front step with her backpack clutched to her chest, her shoes soaked through, mascara streaked down her cheeks because she'd tried to be grown up that morning and wear it like her cousins. She looked up when I got out, and I swear I felt something in me break when she whispered, "They said I can't come in." I remember running to her, wrapping her up, feeling her trembling. She smelled like wet pavement and heartbreak. My own tears mixed with the rain as I asked, "What happened? What did she mean?" But she just shook her head, choking on words that wouldn't come. Behind her, the curtains moved, my mother's silhouette, tall and rigid. She didn't come out. She didn't even open the door. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We had been staying there temporarily after my lease ended, just for a few weeks while I figured things out. I had trusted my parents to give us a safe space, a little time, a little kindness. Instead, they decided without warning that we didn't belong there anymore. That somehow we were burdens instead of family. And the thing that haunts me the most is that they didn't even have the courage to tell me to my face. They told my child. My innocent, tender-hearted little girl, who had just started to smile again after her father walked out. They told her, "You don't belong here." I kept asking myself, what did we do wrong? Was it because I didn't make as much money as my sister? Because I couldn't afford the perfect life they'd always wanted for me? Or was it because my daughter reminded them of me, stubborn, emotional, unwilling to pretend everything was fine? My mother always said I was too much, too sensitive, too outspoken, too emotional. And maybe that's why when she looked at my daughter, she saw another version of me she didn't want to deal with. When I knocked on the door that night, my knuckles sore from the cold, she finally opened it. Her face was expressionless, her eyes flat. "It's better this way," she said. I asked her how on earth it could be better to leave a child crying in the rain. She said, "You need to learn responsibility. You both do, responsibility." As if I hadn't been holding up a collapsing world with my bare hands for years. As if every bill I paid, every meal I skipped to feed my kid, every night I stayed up crying silently didn't already prove that I was trying. But no matter what I said, she didn't care. She turned away. The door clicked shut again. I drove away that night with my daughter asleep in the passenger seat, still sniffling, her body curled into itself like she was trying to disappear. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other reaching across to touch her knee, to remind her I was there. But in that moment, I felt like I'd failed her. I was supposed to protect her from everything. From heartbreak, from cruelty, from feeling unwanted. And yet, she'd learned all of it in one brutal evening, from the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. The days that followed were quiet but heavy. She didn't talk much. She'd sit by the window in the small apartment I managed to find, staring out like she was waiting for someone to come apologize. I wanted to tell her not to hope for that, but I couldn't bring myself to crush that small flicker inside her. She'd ask sometimes, "Why did Grandma say that? Did we do something bad?" I'd try to explain that sometimes people don't understand how much their words can hurt. But the truth was uglier. Sometimes they understand perfectly, and they do it anyway. It took me weeks to unpack what really happened that night. Because it wasn't just about being told to leave. It was about being reminded that love in my family came with conditions. I had spent my whole life earning my place, being the peacemaker, the helper, the one who never said no. And still, when I needed grace, there was none left for me. My parents loved the idea of family as long as it looked polished, picture perfect. But love in the rain. Love when things were messy, uncomfortable, real. That kind of love they didn't have. I kept replaying the image of my daughter's face. The confusion, the disbelief. She had never experienced that kind of rejection before. I think it changed something in her, in both of us. There's a moment when you realize family can break your heart worse than anyone else ever could. And that night, standing in the rain, I learned that lesson all over again. I grew up believing my parents' house was sacred. The place you went when the world was cruel. The place you could knock on the door and know someone would answer. But now I know it was never about the house. It was about control. About who they allowed to belong, who had to earn forgiveness, who was allowed to be human. My mother always believed that love was something you could withdraw like money from a bank. She thought she could teach me lessons by withholding it. But all she taught me was how to stop asking for it. My daughter eventually stopped crying. But the silence that came after was worse. I'd find her drawing sometimes, pictures of houses with locked doors, stick figures standing outside in the rain. Once, she drew herself holding a key. I asked her what it meant. She said, "So next time, I can let myself in." I smiled, but inside I was shattered. Because no child should have to think that way. No child should have to plan for being shut out by the people who should open their arms first. It took a long time to rebuild her sense of safety. I tried everything: bedtime talks, long drives, hot cocoa, and late-night movies. I told her stories about strong women who built new homes from nothing, who didn't wait for permission to belong. Slowly I saw her start to believe again, not in them, but in us. There were moments when I wanted to call my mother and scream. To ask her if she remembered the night she left her own granddaughter out in the cold. But then I realized something: some people don't feel guilt the way you expect them to. They rewrite the story in their heads until they become the victim. In her version, I was ungrateful, dramatic, disrespectful. She would tell anyone who listened that she had tried her best and that I made my choices. Maybe that's the only way she can live with what she did. But I no longer need her version of the story to make sense. I was there. I saw my daughter shaking under the rain. I heard the door close. I remember the sound of thunder masking her cries. That's the truth I live with. And as painful as it is, that truth also set me free. Because the night my mother said, "We've decided this isn't your home," I realized something she never did. A home isn't a place you're allowed to stay, it's a place you're wanted. And if you have to beg to belong, it was never home to begin with. Now, years later, my daughter's older. She still asks sometimes if we'll ever go back. I tell her we already did. Just not to the same house. We built our own home, not from bricks or walls, but from laughter, forgiveness, and the kind of love that doesn't get revoked when life gets hard. We filled it with music, the smell of cinnamon pancakes, the sound of her giggling when she burns the first batch. It's not perfect, but it's ours, and it's safe. Sometimes I still pass by my parents' house. The yard looks the same. The light still warm through the windows. But I don't stop. Because what's inside those walls isn't mine anymore. Maybe it never was. The woman who used to stand in that doorway doesn't live there either. She's somewhere inside me, older, wiser, no longer waiting for a knock on a door that won't open. My daughter once said, "Mom, I don't think Grandma knows what a home really is." I smiled at her and said, "That's okay, baby. We'll teach her by living it. Because the best revenge against cruelty is peace. The best answer to rejection is building a world where you don't have to ask for love. It's simply there." There's a strange kind of strength that grows in you when the people who raised you try to break you. It's quiet but steady, like roots that push through concrete. You stop needing their approval to breathe. You stop explaining why you deserve kindness, and one day, you realize that the very pain they handed you became the foundation you stand on. Every storm ends eventually. That night the rain finally stopped. The clouds pulled apart. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw the stars. My daughter was asleep beside me, her hand still gripping mine. I looked at her and whispered, "You'll never stand outside a locked door again. Not while I'm alive." Because maybe the universe needed to take away the illusion of family to show me the meaning of real love. Maybe being left out in the rain was the only way I'd learn to build warmth that couldn't be taken away. And now, when I think back to that night, to the words, the rain, the heartbreak, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel gratitude. Because they showed me exactly who they were, and that gave me permission to stop searching for them in people who will never care. Home, I've learned, isn't something you inherit, it's something you build. Sometimes out of ashes, sometimes out of tears. And if you're lucky, sometimes out of the kind of love that survives even the coldest rain. Healing began when I stopped trying to reopen doors that were never meant to lead home. For so long, I believed that if I just said the right words, showed enough respect, or waited long enough, those doors would open again. I thought love was a test and forgiveness was the prize for endurance. Every holiday, every missed call, every quiet evening, I found myself walking back to those same thresholds in my mind, knocking on memories that no longer answered. The ache of wanting to belong to people who never wanted to understand me kept me chained to a place that only existed in my hope. It took me years to realize that not every door that closes is an invitation to knock harder. Some are shut for good reason. Some are locked because the person behind them was never capable of loving you the way you needed. But when your heart has been trained to see rejection as a challenge, you forget that peace sometimes comes dressed as silence. I used to replay conversations, arguments, moments that went wrong. I'd twist them in my head trying to find the sentence, the word, the breath that could have changed everything. I thought if I apologized enough, explained enough, softened enough, maybe they'd see me differently. But no matter how much I bent, they only saw what they wanted to see. A version of me small enough to fit their expectations. The hardest part wasn't losing their approval. It was losing the illusion that love lived in those walls. The illusion that if I just waited at that door long enough, it would open, and everything would make sense again. I used to think family meant forever, no matter what. That no matter how far you strayed, there was always a place you could come back to. But sometimes, the place you thought was home was only a holding cell for your guilt. They loved me when I agreed, when I stayed quiet, when I carried the weight of their comfort. But the moment I asked for respect, for equality, for compassion, the locks clicked. It took losing everything I thought I needed to realize that I didn't need their doorway to walk into peace. For years I tried to rebuild bridges out of words and wishes, ignoring that they'd already burned them to keep me out. I told myself I was being the bigger person by forgiving, by showing up, by trying again. But it wasn't forgiveness. It was desperation disguised as grace. I wanted to prove that I was still worthy, that I could be both hurt and loving. But some people mistake your softness for permission to hurt you again. The last time I stood in front of that door, I remember the stillness. My heart was loud, but the air was quiet. The lights were on inside, and for a second, I saw movement through the curtains. That familiar warmth tricked me again, whispering maybe this time. But then I felt the weight of all the times I'd walked away crying, all the times I'd been told I was too emotional, too dramatic, too much. I realized that every time I came back, I gave them another chance to teach me that lesson, so I turned around. My hands were shaking, but my soul was steady. It was the first time leaving didn't feel like losing. Healing didn't come like a sunrise. It came in small, unglamorous ways. It came the morning I made coffee and didn't think about calling them. It came when I laughed without wondering if I was being too loud. It came when I decorated my own place and realized the warmth I felt wasn't from the walls, but from me. It came when I looked at my daughter and saw her joy untangled from the HE of rejection. It came when I understood that home isn't a door someone opens for you. It's the space you create when you stop waiting for someone else to let you in. For a long time, I blamed myself for everything. Maybe I wasn't patient enough, maybe I should have listened more, maybe I should have stayed quiet when I wanted to speak. But the truth is, people who truly love you don't make you question your worth every time you stand up for yourself. They don't confuse obedience with love. They don't tell your child she doesn't belong because of your mistakes. Healing meant finally understanding that I wasn't broken. I was just living in a house built on someone else's conditions. Sometimes I wonder why it took me so long to walk away completely. Maybe because I wanted my daughter to have grandparents. Maybe because I didn't want to admit that the people who raised me were capable of such cruelty. There's a certain loneliness in realizing that the love you craved will never arrive in the form you hoped for. But that loneliness is honest. It's not the kind that keeps you begging at closed doors. It's the kind that teaches you to build your own key, your own threshold, your own peace. There were days I still found myself lingering near the past. I'd see a picture on social media, family gatherings, laughter, everyone pretending the world hadn't cracked open. I'd feel that familiar sting, the whisper saying, "You could have been there if you just said sorry." But then I remembered all the times my apologies were met with silence. All the times forgiveness was used as a leash. I realized I wasn't missing out on love. I was escaping manipulation dressed as affection. Healing is strange like that. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums quietly when you finally choose yourself. Sometimes it's the moment you stop explaining, stop chasing, stop performing. I used to think I had to make them understand, that closure required conversation. But some doors don't need to be reopened for closure. They just need to stay shut. Every time I tried to explain how much they hurt me, I was handing them a map to my pain, and they used it to find new ways to wound me. So I stopped talking, I stopped pleading, I stopped hoping they'd turn into the people I needed. It's not bitterness, it's clarity. I don't hate them, I don't wish them harm, I simply understand now that love without respect isn't love at all. It's dependency, it's survival disguised as loyalty. I grew up thinking family was the root of everything good, but now I know that roots can strangle growth when they wrap too tightly. I had to pull myself out of the soil they buried me in to find sunlight again. Healing also meant forgiving myself, for staying too long, for believing too hard, for teaching my daughter to expect love from people who only offered control. She used to ask me why they didn't come to see her anymore, and I'd lie, saying they were busy. But one night, she looked at me and said, "It's okay, Mom, we don't need them." And that's when I knew the cycle was breaking. The pain stopped being inheritance. The silence stopped being shame. We were finally free to build something new. I started to fill my home with people who didn't need me to shrink to be loved. Friends who listened without judgment, who showed up without keeping score. I learned that family can be chosen. That love doesn't always share your blood, but it shares your heartbeat. The laughter that echoes through our walls now feels lighter, unburdened by expectation. There's no pretending, no walking on eggshells, just peace. Real, quiet peace. Sometimes on sleepless nights I still think about those doors. I imagine what it would be like if I knocked again, if they opened it, if they said the words I used to crave, "We're sorry. Come home." But then I remember the ache that lived behind that door, the way I used to lose pieces of myself every time I walked through it. I remember how small I felt trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. And that memory is enough to remind me that healing isn't about returning. It's about knowing you don't have to. The truth is, some doors look like safety but hide sharp edges. You keep reaching for the handle thinking love will feel like warmth again, but all it does is reopen old wounds. I learned that healing isn't about proving anything. It's about protecting your peace like it's sacred. Because it is. The moment I stopped reopening those doors, my heart started to breathe. I realized I wasn't the same person who once waited outside, drenched in guilt and hope. I had grown too much to fit back inside that smallness, and maybe that's what growth really is. The quiet refusal to return to what broke you. The understanding that home isn't where you started, it's where you finally feel safe to be who you are. I used to chase their love like air, desperate to be understood. Now I understand myself. I know what love feels like. It's gentle, not conditional. It's warm, not weaponized. It welcomes you without needing you to prove your worth. There's still a part of me that mourns what could have been. The family dinners, the laughter, the childhood memories that now feel like strangers. But I no longer mistake that mourning for a reason to go back. Missing someone doesn't mean you belong with them. Missing the past doesn't mean it was healthy. It just means you're human. And healing doesn't erase that. It just teaches you to live with it, without letting it pull you backwards. Every day now, I pass new doors. Some open, some closed, and I don't feel that urge to knock anymore. I've learned to pause, to listen to my intuition, to recognize which doors lead to peace and which lead to pain. And I carry that wisdom quietly like armor. It doesn't make me hard, it makes me whole. Healing began when I stopped trying to reopen doors that were never meant to lead home. Because the home I was searching for wasn't behind them. It was inside me all along.